Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Poole. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. PL Talks is a passion project of our law firm Poole Lawyers. Over the past few years, we've had the opportunity and privilege of sitting down to chat with exceptional Alberta artists. Now that we're in a pandemic, we've taken the opportunity to broadcast live over YouTube and to welcome people from all over the country to our discussions with artists. Today, we are sitting in the Herringer Kiss Gallery. Surrounding us is an extraordinary exhibit that peers into the lives and studio practices of 6 art-making couples. 2 of those artists, Bill Laing and Barbara Milne, are here with me today to talk about their individual artistic practices and how they have partnered in life and art. We have behind us and around us here in the gallery stunning pieces by Bill and Barbara. My wife Carolyn and I have known Bill and Barbara almost as long as they have known each other. Indeed, we own 3 of Barbara's larger scale paintings. Bill and Barbara have been together for more than 40 years, making art, a home, and 2 terrific children. They're now adult twins, Claire and David. Bill, a world-renowned printmaker and sculptor, and Barbara, a freshly minted University of Toronto graduate in painting, met at the Mira Godard Gallery in Calgary. Remarkably, Barbara fell for his invitation to meet again so he could show her his etchings. And the rest, shall we say, was history, and what a history it's been. Bill was born in Scotland and came to Canada for the first time when he was 16. He studied first at the Vancouver School of Art, where he graduated with an honors diploma in photography and printmaking. Later, he studied printmaking at the Brighton Polytechnic and received his master's degree from the Royal College of Art in London. He taught art at the Alberta College of Art before teaching at the University of Calgary for 39 years. Bill has exhibited in more than 500 group shows and over 50 solo shows across Canada, the UK, and the world. His work is in over 100 public and private institutions, including the National Gallery of Canada and galleries and museums in Britain, France, Australia, the United States, Japan, and China. Bill tells me that living in both Canada and the UK most of his young life gave him the advantages and the disadvantages of feeling like an outsider from the internal workings of a place. The experience of being born, raised, and living all of one's life in a single town or city was a mystery to Bill. Instead, his practice saw him observing and collecting the remnants of places he has lived in or visited. These collections of objects, memories, and ideas have manifested into drawings, prints, and sculptures that describe the isolation of the figure or objects in space. They are about contemplation and stillness. Barbara was born in Windsor, Ontario. In 1979, she moved to Calgary, and she tells me she was immediately impressed with the space, light, and monumentality of her surroundings. Barbara began to address the subject of landscape. Seeing the environment as both powerful and fragile, Barbara reshapes her surroundings through sketches, collage, and memory, resulting in work that presents a parallel experience and emotional resonance of place. Barbara has attended various artist residencies in Iceland, Newfoundland, Skokie, and the Columbia Icefield. She has participated in dozens of solo and group shows, and her work is in private and public collections in Canada and abroad, including the Canada Council Art Bank, the Canadian Embassy in Brussels, the Bank of America, and the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, and of course the collection of Poole Lawyers. Barbara taught as a sessional instructor in painting and drawing at the Alberta College of Art, from 1988 to 2012, and in 2016, a self-directed residency entitled Responding to the Collection of the White Museum in Banff was followed by a solo exhibition and catalog at the White Museum. Both Bill and Barbara are members of the Royal Canadian Academy of Art. Enough of me and my introduction. In the time that we have, we're going to do a whirlwind tour of your many years of artistic practice. At the end, we'll make some time for questions from our audience. So Barbara and Bill, let's have a chat. Bill, I think let's go with seniority over beauty and start with you. So, I think we're going to look at our first slide, which is an interesting piece that you did while you were in London before you came to Canada for the second time. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
This is one of a series of prints. I tend to work in series. This came about by going to London and experiencing the vastness of the city and it being full of people, but also feeling that it was empty in many cases. And when I say empty, I mean relating to social interaction. I would travel on the underground 40 minutes a day going to and from the Royal College. And I would sit in the tube. And I was mentioning earlier that it was very interesting to sit in this confinement of this tube, that 1 minute was completely crowded, the next minute it was empty. And sitting in the seating arrangements that I would usually sit in, we'd sit against the edges of the tube, and you'd be facing across, there would be a space, and you'd be facing across to the people who were on the other side. And sometimes you were tired during that travel, and you would nod off, and you would remember looking at this very, very uninteresting or interesting person in front of you, and then all of a sudden you would wake up because of the jolt of the tube. And all of a sudden there would be a completely different person there. And also they would be sometimes in movement. So I tried to capture, being a photographer, I tried to capture that same feel again in the studio by using models. And I would use long exposures to create this feeling of movement.
So when we look at this piece, I find that what's remarkable for me about it is that the sort of the fuzzy movement of it.
Yeah, that.
And so there's something about this lonely shadow of a person in London, there but not really there.
That's right.
And then I think the next piece is also a piece that's worth taking a look at because it demonstrates, for me anyway, the whole movement, the loneliness, the London experience, and it's a piece of sculpture that you did that's not a...
In 1973.
In 1973, when you, as we noted before, you and I were both young men then.
Yeah.
So Matt's going to just take a look at this piece while you describe it.
Yeah, this is a continuation of the prints that I did, the series of etchings, the ones within the landscape. And I was always interested in pushing the point of printmaking. For me, the print sometimes didn't offer enough because it had a certain flatness to it, even though I was using etching, which had a lot of tactile quality about it. But I felt I had to take it further. And because of my sculpture background, I started to play with the whole idea of casting resin and cutting into it for a surface, flat surface that I could use, and then silt screening onto that flat surface, and then taking those shapes and putting them back together again through the use of pouring more resin on top of resin.
I think it really emphasizes the isolation of the figure by having them suspended in that resin.
Yeah, that piece is titled Q, because I was always in London, you were standing in the queues waiting to get in and out of tubes and buses and things.
I think to sort of continue on this, the next two pieces are two, what I would say, two iconic Bill Laing prints. And I think these were done shortly after you came to
Canada. To Alberta.
To Alberta.
Yeah.
The second time you came to Canada.
Yeah. So this piece here, I did a series of nocturnal prints that were called night lights. But I think this one, if I remember rightly, is called the chair from London. And the little chair, which I used quite often over 10 years in my work, was actually, I was fascinated because it was in my photo studio, and it was actually a very small child's chair like this. And when I photographed it the first time and looked at the negatives, I thought, this is really interesting what the camera will do as far as relating scale. So the chair, I could place that in any kind of space through the use of photography. I could enlarge it or I could reduce it, which then it became this play on, foreground, middle ground, and background, and how you would place yourself as a human being in the environment. So the chair, the chair is a symbol actually for myself or home.
Well, that's what I was going to say was, what's intriguing is the first two prints are this lonely young man who's not of London.
Very unsure of myself.
Yes, and not of Brighton, and not of Glasgow, and not of Vancouver. Mm-hmm. But what's intriguing is you now have a chair and an Alberta landscape. Mm-hmm. You're still not of the place.
No.
But landscape is becoming part of your lexicon.
I had the same feeling that Barbara expressed a minute ago about when you come to Alberta. I thought, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I was so used to doing these small pieces in London, which were dealing with certain things. And to come here, there's this vastness of the sky, the vastness of the land. And then I got very interested in, again, playing with space, because it allowed me to put little things into that space and make images.
And the next piece, which tends to, in some ways, bring tear, it's a two-color print, but you see the piece, and so many of us have arrived at our first apartment or our second apartment or whatever, and you open the closet and there's one hanger. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what you meant, what this piece means to you, and it's an autobiographical piece to some extent.
It brings back lots of memories. But I did a series of these coat hangers. But I remember, and I was talking to my son about this just a little while ago, that he brought up the thing about the coat hanger, and he said, "Dad, do you remember that print that you did where there was 4 coat hangers on a rail?" And I said, yeah, and that's to do with the whole idea of going into a room and seeing what has been taken from that room. And it was taken from that room. And I was left with the room. And I had to build from that. And to take things and hang my things on those hangers.
There's a little element of autobiography in the next piece too, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is. I tend to pull things together. Like, travel to me is a very important element, and has been ever since I've been a young person. Because I traveled a lot, whether I wanted to or whether I didn't want to. I did travel a lot. This piece here is a gathering of images that I put together dealing with the landscape in Alberta, the landscape of London, and the landscape of Scotland. The mountain is part of the island of Arran in the west coast of Scotland. There where my family lived in Prestwick, which is on the other side of this water. And we would look out the window of their house over to the island of Arran. And the water plays funny things because it's actually grass. But I wanted to make it look like water. And so again, it's like the water of Scotland and the grass of the prairies. The figure, again, is like the white silhouette with blue in it, is kind of like going through a door into another landscape, but reminiscent of my time in London with the purple shadow.
So one of the enduring themes of your work comes from an expression you've called assemblage. Mm-hmm. And so I see in that piece the combination of all kinds of elements of your life. We were discussing before, the colors are so warm and inviting, but the sense of loneliness and disquiet are there as well. As I said before, we're doing a race through more than 40 years of your life. One of the recurring things that you do is you take images and you use them but in different places, in different assemblages. And I'm particularly fond of the next three slides because we have the lucite. It's sideways, but
yeah, that's an etching again. It's called a Long Way from Bradford.
Everyone lie down.
I did a series of etchings of a rose. I've always been a fan. David Hockney's my idol, and always been a fan of Hockney's work. And I was always taken by his still lives. And so that rose is taken from a part of a painting that he did. And I used that as again, a starting off point. It became the figure within the space. And you'll notice, or you could have.
So we could go to the next, why don't we go to the next one, which has the rose again, and I misspoke. The rose is coming up.
Yeah.
There. So the rose is no longer an etching, the rose is something else.
Yes. This is dealing with the kind of idea of the domestic scene. You know, in Scotland, we always had a fireplace in our living room, and the mantle was always very, very important. It was a place to place things for permanent use, or to place things just there for support, and then you're able to take them off at certain points. That piece there, I collect, as I mentioned before, I love to go around and collect things. And so the wallpaper in that piece, I was walking around Sunnyside one day, and there was this deserted house. And I went into the deserted house, and I saw part of that wallpaper on the wall, but in the closet there was a half-used roll of that wallpaper in the dirty closet. It's kind of, there was nothing else in there. So I removed that because I wanted to use it in some way. If you look at the...
So I can see the headline now.
What?
World-famous artist Bill Laing arrested shortly after PL Talks.
Well, the evidence
25-year-old.
The evidence is gone because that house is no longer there.
All right.
So, but
that's
anyway,
a good defense. I'll let you go.
But the interesting thing about it was there's a picture in there of an old woman sitting on a chair, the frame piece in the middle, and that is also a drawing that David Hockney did, and I was very interested in that Hockney, and I copied it and made an etching out of it, and that became kind of like a reminder, because I like that image. It reminded me of my grandmother, who was a real mentor for me all through my life still, and when I was living with her. It reminded me of her. Again, the frame becomes like a window or a door into another part of a room or a landscape. And I use those devices quite often in that respect.
So the next, so we've started with an etching of a rose. Now we have a black lucite rose on a fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next piece evolves into a real assemblage that is a living, breathing sculpture, but we see that the elements of the sculpture carry on the same themes. So you've got wallpaper, but now we've got an odd-shaped chair.
Well, this piece is, it's full of lots of stuff.
Oh, go ahead.
It'd probably take a month to talk about it, but
well, you have 30 seconds.
It's called. My art dealer is going like this, just over the other side there. The thing that's interesting about this is called Room Deluxe, Sucky Hall Street. So anyone who has lived in Glasgow or visited Glasgow, Sucky Hall Street was one of the main streets in Glasgow, and there is the Glasgow School of Art actually is on just off Sucky Hall Street. There's the Willow Tea Rooms, which are on Sucky Hall Street. So that starts to give you some clues as to my interest in a particular person. And that person is Charles Rennie Mcintosh, the Scottish architect. He designed the Glasgow School of Art. He designed the Willow Tea Rooms, and some of the chairs that were in there are similar to this chair. I made a copy of this chair, and I wanted.
And that's something I think we need to emphasize, Bill, is that
these things take time.
They take time, and you make them.
Yeah.
It's not as if you went off and found that chair.
No.
You found the idea of the chair, and then you created it.
Yes.
Now, at the risk of offending everybody, I'm watching the time. I'm going to suggest we go to the last two of the slides.
Okay.
I want to tell people that one of the privileges of anybody's life would be to go and sit in Bill and Barbara's garden. And so there's some elements. If we go back to 11 there, this is a brilliant print with more than
silkscreen. Silk
screen.
Yeah.
If you could just describe that and how the leaves got in there, and then we'll take a look at a piece that we have the photograph of, but the original's in the show here.
This piece is it's kind of like a travelogue in that it represents a part of Barbara's and my visit to Paris a number of years ago, and the idea of, we stayed in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and it was a beautiful little hotel we stayed in, and they had these balconies, and I was very fascinated with the ironwork that is on those balconies. Every house has a different balcony and a different kind of design, but I was really fascinated with that. And then also the different variations of color represent the sheer blinds that were in the room. But the leaves, so that dealt with that visitation to France. The leaves are actually from my garden. So I took photographs of fallen leaves and then started to use those in this print, you know, placing them in different positions. I did that before I got the print just the way I wanted it. It took some time to do that. But again, it's to do with travel, and I pick things up here, there, and everywhere. And I guess I can be considered a romantic in some ways, you know, an immature romantic. So Barbara always thinks I'm too immature, but yeah.
So one of the things that I draw from that piece, though, is as you mature, and you have this beautiful garden that you've tended for 45 years, mm-hmm. you go to Paris, but you bring a piece of home there to your work. So mm-hmm. there's you're being drawn back into your life with Barbara and your children and your garden. I think, and this is an impromptu move, but Matt, I'm wondering if you can pick up the mobile camera again, and instead of looking at the piece as a photograph, you could go over, Bill, and describe the piece on the wall.
Yeah. This piece here is a gathering again of remnants of my garden. And the oval, again, is a bit like a window that you can look in or look out of. I made that image from 2 photographs that I took. And I was in Victoria, and I was in the Victoria Art Gallery, and the Emily Carr room I was walking through, and I saw some wallpaper that was on the wall, and I photographed the wallpaper, but also I photographed, there's 3 photographs in it. I photographed the wallpaper, but then I photographed the lace curtain, and then beyond that, in the foreground, I photographed the garden. So the trees, it was lucky it was during the winter, and so there was not too much foliage on the big trees. So that became like looking at the landscape, but also remembering what my garden was like too. And the leaf here, again, I'm playing with 2 different scales. The scale here is kind of a little bit more realistic. I've enlarged this leaf to kind of point out the fragility of the leaf. You know, there's still some life in the images here, but this is starting to talk about the deterioration of, and talking about the time. And I think I should remember time.
Yes. So I think that the interesting thing, Matt, if you could just pan down through the rest. We don't have time for you to describe them, but for me, they're spectacularly beautiful, and that there really is no way that anyone who wasn't both a sculptor and a printmaker and a painter could do these, apart from the fact that you also construct them. I still think that your notion of not having a home is there, but I have the sense that at this stage in your life doing this work, you've come home.
Jeff, I think I'm very, very lucky that I have a wonderful life because of my wife and my 2 children. They have really supported me and made me grow in a different way than I did many, many years ago. And you know, so I think that's really important. So I have found home.
Well, I think you have, and I think that for me, and we're gonna talk to Barbara now. The journey that we've just taken, although it went like that, is a journey where a continuum of starting where you're trying to find home. Your most recent pieces at Deborah's gallery here tell me you've come home.
Yeah, and I feel it.
So, Barbara.
Yes.
I'm assuming that Bill will back up that you never interrupt him. And we'll see how well he does in not interrupting you.
But he's welcome to if I freeze.
So one of the things that we talked about when we had that lovely time in the garden was collecting things. And there's something kind of fun about our first slide here, because in the moment it's somewhat difficult to recognize what it is, but you have a very interesting collection.
I have been collecting buttons for 25 years at least, maybe even longer. And what I love about them is how they, when assembled together, create all these amazing intersections of color and texture and pattern, lots of unexpected colors, a lot of neutralized colors that are typically found in vintage buttons. So I make bracelets, jewelry, things like that, but truly my greatest satisfaction is looking at them just as they are, assembled and overlapping each other, because I find them very inspiring for other things. And I really wanted to start with this slide because I think having a kind of diverse cross-section of interest is always feeding one's work in different ways you don't imagine.
So the next slide is also kind of interesting because it's a possession of yours that you've owned for a long time.
Yes. It's an image of a quilt, and it's made out of men's suiting, and it caught my eye in a quilt shop probably 35 years ago, and I've just had it with me ever since. I love it. I love this sort of intersecting of colors and pattern, and the inspiration that gives me on a very unconscious and subconscious level all of the time. And as you look at the other paintings, you'll sort of see some of those colors creeping in, and probably relationships.
So the next slide I think is quite intriguing because it's a photograph that you took not so long ago, but if you see the photograph and you're familiar with your work,
yes,
you can see you and Bill have lived in your house for 38, 39 years.
Yes, a long time.
And this is somewhere where you hang out.
It's just north of us, Nose Hill, and it's such an iconic place to both view from a distance and to experience through walking. And it's, I think, one of the largest natural reserves in North America. It's a very spiritual place. It's very powerful. It's kind of charged. And all of these emotions, I don't think I ever felt that way about landscape until I moved to Alberta and was really overcome with this sense of magnitude and majestic. and feeling compelled to want to work with it in my painting. I went to York and we worked in abstraction and conceptual art. That's really what the school was all about at that time. And so the idea of working in a representational way just never occurred to me until I moved here and could see the possibilities. And artists like George O'Keeffe and Arthur Dove have always been heroes of mine. And I think because they look as much outward as inward, they're working with a kind of internalized landscape. So it was working with that kind of framework that got me going and thinking about possibilities of landscape.
Well, as one of your many fans, the next slide shows the gift that you've given anyone who sees your work, because, you know, as you travel the world, you discover that landscape artists see things in landscapes that the rest of us might initially find to be boring. But this is an abstract painting that at the same time captures the magic of the Alberta foothills.
Yes, it does have a kind of simplicity on first viewing, and then after time you sort of fall into it almost as a kind of meditation. The trees along the top create a real rhythm and a sense of repetition, and I love that kind of light and dark moving about across the surface. The panoramic perspective is something just perfect for our landscape, and so I did many iterations of this kind of view.
Iterations, but not the emotion, the sense of the beauty of the landscape gets captured in so many different ways. The next piece to me is quite interesting too, because one of the focuses of your practice is the sky.
Yes, well,
and the
again,
horizon.
The Alberta sky, it's really hard to explain it to someone who hasn't been here. And if I've been away for any period of time, I feel this incredible happiness and relief to be back here amongst this sort of welcoming, embracing sky. And the clarity of light and the distant views one has, I find very moving. And so about 35 years ago, I did many drawings, pastel drawings, again in this panoramic format, and again dealing with the sort of repetition of form. And I was saying to you earlier, the idea of simplicity, but avoiding anything simplistic. So wanting something to have a long read, sort of impact at first, but also a sustainability with a long read has always been a kind of ambition of mine.
One of the fun things that happened this year, my wife's parents came and lived with us, and they took many pictures on our back deck of the sky. And they, even though they, of course, in their 80s and having lived for a very long time in Alberta, they found themselves this summer, because there was a pandemic, completely intrigued by the clouds. So that's one of those things. I mentioned earlier that you'd done some work at the Columbia ice field, and I think this is just a fantastic photo of you and at work. I wonder if you could just tell us.
Yes, it was, as I call it, my Kodak moment, that I was working on a drawing, and it was the first one I had done of mountains. I was very intimidated by that scale of landscape, and prior to that had really worked more with a kind of foothill, something in a more close-up perspective. So I just sat down and said, I'm doing this, and it was about day 3 into this residency, and so I sat there with my easel and began to draw, and Craig Richards from the White Museum was coming up behind me on the hill and said, "Don't move," and he photographed me there. And I've often used this to show family and friends who maybe had doubts about my skill in drafting that yes, indeed, I can draw.
No one has any doubts. I'd like to return to this idea that we discussed with Bill of assemblage. The next slide is something that you do a lot of.
Yes, I do. Collage is a really important part of my practice. I spend hours assembling photographs, printing them off, printing them on, you know, not good paper necessarily. So they're my own photographs, found images, things given to me like postcards, things I'll cut up and reshape into these collages. And often they're in a shape within a shape or framed within a frame. And the oval to me, harkening back to Bill, I think has come through because it makes me think of, well, the cameo, the idea of looking back in time, the idea of an oval mirror, so sort of looking through a portal of some kind. So these are just small, kind of 8.5 by 11, and they're with me all the time in the studio, and they become touchstones for my painting. And I think they give me all kinds of color pathways and directional pathways that I wouldn't naturally think about if I was just working from a photograph per se. So it's really important to me to kind of assemble these different sources into the paintings.
And then it's really important to you to really play with the image within an image.
That's right, yes.
And this flows from the assemblage of these
it does.
things. The next one is one that you did in Newfoundland, and as a Newfoundlander, I think it's amazing because when you first look at it, it tells you one thing, but when you live with it, it tells you something else. And I think one of the things you remarked to me that I found remarkable was it would be so much easier not to do that. No. So why don't you just tell the viewers what you're trying to do in this one?
Well, I was invited to come to Newfoundland as part of a residency 23 years ago, and the idea was to paint the landscape from the eyes of someone from away. And so it was really a deliberate choice of artists from across Canada to come and work on the Newfoundland landscape. And it was at the time of the moratorium on fishing, and there was a kind of collective sadness in the air about the economy and about the future. And we were highly aware of it. A lot of boats were upside down under the trees, and yet you'd talk to fishermen and they say the place is full of cod, but we just can't get it, you know. And it was quite emotional. So knowing that as a kind of subtext fueled the painting, and just also the incredible heartbreaking beauty of the place. I just was astounded by it, and the weather and the light and the color and all of those things, the temperature changing all the time. So the white boat, I have many boats in my paintings, but in this particular case, the white boat had a kind of spiritual presence, a sense of something from another time, but also a sense of hope. So they're often very layered, and I think that idea of assemblage is an underpinning in all my work because they're not just one thing.
The next slide is an equally interesting one, and this is one that resonated with me.
Yes, especially being a Newfoundlander. I found, again, the landscape so energetic that I really wanted that hand to carry through in the paintings. So these are oil and a lot of glazing and then pushing cloth and brush through the paint as it was wet and then layering it with some more paint. And so there's a strong gestural influence that I think just comes from the kind of spirituality of that place that, you know, I'm sort of a conduit. Whenever I'm in a different place, you just want to kind of feel it and then bring it out in the work.
I love the next one too, because this is like 2 or 3 paintings in one.
Yes, this was part of an exhibition at the Nickel Arts Museum, I think it was 11 years ago, and the title of the exhibition was called Overland. And part of that exhibition, I had some found placemats that I'd found at a charity shop, and I'd painted over them. They were scenes, sort of English scenes, and I painted over these very energetic little small landscape drawings, paintings, sketches, and I really liked the fact that there was this sort of shadowing of the landscape beneath coming through, but at the same time intersecting with the landscape above, and it would build in a kind of unconscious narrative of the relationship of those two things. And so here we have a kind of oval shape again, which is a portal or a view through the mountain, and it could be a lake, it could be a pond. It's, again, a certain ambiguity, which I quite like in the painting, and it can be tricky trying to find that, because at what point do you leave it? And I think, for me, the success of a painting has a lot to do with the air that is circulating in the painting, and if it has no air, then it's a dead thing. And quite often I'll resurrect them, though, so I go back and I just keep working them and resuscitating them. And this is a typical moment when Bill would walk in and go, "Don't touch it." And I'd say, "But I'm not finished." He'd say, "No, it's working just the way it is. Just back off." And then he'll come back a few hours later and go, "Where did it go?" And I go, "It's in there." So it's an interesting dialogue, and it's fantastic, because we so appreciate what the other has to say. Whether or not we go that direction is again, it just depends on the situation, but it's quite a gift to have that voice nearby, and to access that, and to just get another set of eyes and another lens looking at what you're doing, without a lot of preamble. I mean, we really know so well what the other is thinking and attempting at times, so it's not like I have to give him the context and things. He's got a good idea of that, and he'll come in and discuss it, and I value it enormously.
So Matt, if you can take us to slide 12, that's the one of the Bow River. This one.
Right. This was part of a series that were at the White Museum 4 years ago. It was the exhibition you mentioned in your introduction called Responding to the Collection of the White Museum. And I spent a lot of time in the cabin where Catherine and Peter White lived, and sourced a lot of images and objects and photographed them. But I was constantly aware of the Bow River outside and thinking, this is what Catherine White would have looked at from her kitchen. And I also, 40 years ago, when I arrived in Calgary, went to Banff and looked at that very same spot at the Bow River, and it blew me away. I think that color is emblematic of the rivers here and the lakes, and that kind of turquoise, it just moves me from a very deep place within. And so I wanted to do a painting of that, but at the same time I was aware of that kind of domestic environment again, probably hearkening back to kind of our conversations, Bill and I, and the curtain looking through. Also the idea of daylight moving into darkness, and so that sense of time moving over a period. And because I was in Banff for several weeks, I was really privileged to watch that weather and time change. So this is a kind of painting of stillness, but also a painting of a lot of motion and movement and change.
Well, and at the same time, there's a number of paintings there.
Yes.
Because when you approach the painting, you don't fully appreciate that there's a curtain.
That's right. It's very subtle, and it's challenging, because there's always a little voice that goes, is this a bit hokey? Is this a bit trite? Is this, overthinking things? And so you have to find that perfect balance, and again, sometimes they just don't survive till the end, by the end of the day they're not there. But in this case, the curtain survived in a very subtle way, and I was pleased about that.
And then before we just take you to take a look at a couple of the pieces in this show, I think there's an interesting series of 3 slides we're going to look at. One is the next assemblage.
Yes, this is a collage I did many years ago, and have done several paintings based on this. You probably wouldn't recognize the final paintings, but what I like is the coming together, the dovetailing of 2 different places, 2 different times, 2 different palettes, and then introducing these found objects and shapes and colors that wouldn't normally exist within that environment. And they give me a kind of map that helps me navigate into another painting, and it might again be a kind of overlay of a completely different image that I would work into this, or work this into that.
So if I can invite the people that are watching to to just sort of take your imagination and look at the next, which is a drawing that you did before you did a painting.
Right. I was fortunate to be in Salt Spring Island in January, just this year, and it was spectacular because we arrived in about 2 feet of snow, and by the next morning the snow was melting and the atmosphere was getting, you know, very drenched and sort of silvery almost. And I found some of the images just, again, quite iconic. And of course the spruce trees that were in front of us from where we were staying were very powerful. And I did a series of drawings based on that. So here we are now with a painting done since that. Always a time frame between doing the drawings and digesting and then imagining where that might go. Several months later, this is a 4-foot by 8-foot painting, and I include that scale because it's really got quite a majestic scale to it. And I think scale is really important when you address a piece, because with this scale you're really walking into it. It's kind of it envelops you. And I wanted to give that sense of dense undergrowth, and it's called Nocturne Border, and you can sort of see that slice on the right. It's echoing that collage that happened before. So it's a chance through collage and memory and drawings to suspend logic, which I quite enjoy doing, and I think it takes me back to those abstract roots that I had as a student, to juxtapose those things together.
So Matt, if you could just slip back to 13 and show 13, 14, and 15 in light of what Barbara just said. So if we're looking at 13, we've got an image on the right side that's not exactly related to the image on the left. We've got undergrowth, we've got pieces of blue, and then you move to a drawing that you make at the time after a snowstorm, and you're finally translating it all into a painting that is of one piece at the same time that it's a collage.
It is. It felt, as I was working on it, it had a kind of magical presence about it, working through the sky and the colors and the lights and the darks. I love a painting that has a full range of value, and that can be dangerous. Sometimes it can fall into a kind of darkness, and to lift it up again with lighter hues is always a challenge, but very much a kind of condensation of perhaps a 24-hour period when one moves from light to dark, and trying to wrap it all up into one painting.
For me, it's so much fun, having just gone through Bill's assemblage of pieces of his life, to see that you collect pieces and then translate them into paintings. So it would be impossible to say you're doing the same thing, but it would also be impossible to not see the influence that you've had on each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I'm hoping you can do, Matt, just to close off before we take some questions, is that if you could just perhaps capture the 2 paintings or 3 paintings that are behind me, because I think that what's really fun is these are your garden.
Yes, they are. Different perspectives. The one in the middle that you're looking at right now is a kind of rendering based on Bill's blue poppies, which are a very difficult flower to grow in Alberta, and so they're quite rare, and they're very special because of the color. And I wanted to kind of have a sense of those poppies merging with that foliage and environment around them. And I worked on this for quite some time, again, resuscitating and killing and resuscitating. And I worked with the square and put a kind of reflection of a circle in the square. And it really came from a sense of where we are right now, this sense of the macrocosm of the world and where we're all at with COVID, and the microcosm of our garden and the kind of perfection of the small world. And so it embraces those 2 sensibilities. The
and
piece,
still it's a painting within a painting.
that's right. And
Yes.
the piece on the right of that is of daisies, and in this case, they almost feel submerged within a ground, a very active ground, which again came about from one of my collages that I began with and drew and painted into it, and then brought the daisies into it. So lots of sort of found images that come from the collage, but referencing back to the garden and the colors and the kind of delight and beauty of that natural environment.
Terrific. So we could go on and on. We probably could stay here as we did in your garden for 3 or 4 hours. But this has been very, very special for me, and we're going to stay for those people who might want to stay for a few questions and answers. But we'll conclude the formal part of the program, if I can find my notes. Just as I enjoyed the time in your garden and the time we had in my office preparing for this, I've totally enjoyed the last hour. It's flown by, though. We said we'd try to stick it to 40 minutes.
It has.
The privilege of being with you is amazing, and I want to thank you both for sharing with me and those watching. Your work is extraordinary, as anyone would see, but also what's extraordinary is the bond that you have with each other, and the connection between your work and yourselves is something we should all ask for, but not many people get. I also want to thank Deborah Herringer-Kiss, firstly for putting on such a great show, and I hope whoever is watching will get down while the show is on, because we've just shown you a small portion of a great show. And thanks for inviting us and hosting us at your gallery.
We'd like to take a moment to thank you so much for your
Yes.
initiative in this project, and we've enjoyed watching some of the other ones you did, and it is a privilege for us to have been invited, and it's taught us a lot. You know, when you look inward because of this kind of a project, it's very revealing, and I think we've learned a lot about our relationship, and we really appreciate that. So thank you, and again, thank you to Deborah. It's been wonderful being part of this project of yours, and you feel very, very happy to be included.
And I'd like to thank Deborah, because I was just looking at you know, the number of years I've had contact with Deborah, and it's quite a bit. She's going like this. I won't put numbers down, but no. But she also is a great person, a great partner in art with us. You know, like very supportive. You know, and to allow us to do this in her gallery is just pretty special. And I would also like to thank the technical staff.
Yes.
And Jeff, and I seem to remember
Robin.
that I was probably looking too much down on the floor as opposed to looking at the beautiful Deborah. But anyway, I would thank all of you.
And Robin too.
And Robin.
You're just terrific. You work
Thank
very
you.
hard. And you guys, thank you.
This could not have happened without Robin Young. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Waddell brothers, Justin and Matt.
Fantastic.
So that concludes the formal part. We have a few questions that I'm getting the sign from Robin. So Robin will ask the question, and you guys will answer.
So I only have a screen name, so I won't share that, but someone would like to know if you have a particular place on the planet that inspires your creativity. There's kind of one spot that gets the juices flowing for you.
Is this a question for me?
Yeah, it's
or
a question for
both
both of you.
Just repeat the question.
So the question is
Yeah.
there somewhere on the planet Earth that inspires you? And then I would add to that, is it the same place or do you have different places?
I think there's many places on the planet that inspire me, as you've probably heard from my discussion. But probably the one that's the most important is being with Barbara, the place with Barbara.
Well, I'd like to add, of course I feel the same way, but I'd also like to say, you know, Bill spent years in London in a really formative time of his life, and so did I. I was there as a teenager for 2 years, living with my family and going to a girls' school and adapting to a very foreign environment, even though everyone spoke English. It was an exciting time, and we both love London, and I think it's because of that that we look back on a time when we both were there as younger people, and it just has a city full of possibilities culturally and visually and art-wise. It's so exciting. So it's a favorite city, but I think both of us, whenever we've gone anywhere, to use that expression, we bloom where we're planted. You know, we really like being in new places and adventuring, and you know,
and we travel well
that.
Together.
We do, yeah.
Another question, Robin?
So on the note of traveling well together, someone would like to know if you could share a little bit about your practice of artistic exchange and connection as a couple.
So someone has asked for you to describe how the exchanges you have, and we'll only describe the pleasant ones. I'm sure they're all pleasant.
You know, when we're traveling, it's very interesting. We will go to museums. Usually we will say, okay, I'll see you in 2 hours here. And so we'll go off and we'll look at the art. But the most wonderful part of it is when we come back, and usually it's over a glass of wine or at home in the hotel, and just discuss then what we saw, the good, the bad, and the special, you know. And so it's, yeah, I think that's
another thing I recall is Liberty's shop in London is my favorite store in the world, and I would typically walk around with bolts of fabric, and when Bill and I were first there together, he would go off to a pub like, you know, and then he started following me around with this fabric, and he'd get fabric, and then the fabric would find its way into his work. And so that kind of cross-fertilization is always at play, and I think we've both grown to appreciate what the other has as a passion. And Bill, being a printmaker, he helped me do some etchings a few times, and it was only recently he dug a few out, and at the time that I did them, I thought they were really abysmal, and then I looked at them the other day and thought, oh, those have a rather charming feel to them. They're working.
Just to, you know, in regards to fabrics, also we go to San Francisco and there's a place called Britex, and it's a fabric store. And Barbara likes bargains, so she usually goes when the sales are on. And there's, I think, 4 or 5 floors
easily,
to this place.
Yeah.
So what ends up, we start walking around, and then she's gathering stuff, and I'm holding it, and then she says, and I see the lineup going up the stairs like this. And I say, Barbara, we're never going to get out of here. Like, the 4th floor is full, and you have to pay in the 1st floor. And so she said, well, okay, go up, get in line. So I go up to the 4th floor, and I stand in line, and I slowly, one step after another, as someone downstairs is buying and is left, I slowly work my way down. Of course, Barbara's still bringing stuff.
But you also form wonderful conversations and
Oh yeah,
bonds
I
with
get to
many
know
of
nice ladies. And
usually ladies in the line, and they keep saying, my husband would never be here. I can't believe you're doing this. And so you've had some nice conversations.
Yeah. So that's a long-winded answer.
And one more.
Any words of advice or encouragement for aspiring artists?
I would, the thing I've always said as a teacher is talent's one thing, but what you really need is tenacity and endurance. And that really means being stubborn, having a kind of vision, and having your own definition of success, because you have to work from within. You know, intrinsic motivation is stronger than extrinsic, and so just keeping your eyes on what matters to you and keep working, I think is critical, and I'm sure you would say the same.
And let your imagination go wild.
Yeah, feel, you know, dream.
A lot of people don't use their imagination enough.
And you use the word dream, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that in their years as teachers, these guys were loved by their students. And
we loved our students.
And they loved their students. But I would share your view that for anybody who wants to make it in this world at almost anything, talent is a commodity that a lot of people have. Tenacity is much more rare.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for watching. That concludes the latest PL Talks. Keep your eye out for our next one. Good night.